Imagine being in the biggest band in the world, but feeling completely trapped. Fame, noise, pressure, so intense that even the Beatles couldn't survive it on stage. Today, we explore the real reasons why Ringo Starr finally revealed why the world's most legendary band stopped performing live forever. And trust me, the truth is shocking. Ringo Starr often said that being a Beatle felt like living inside a storm, loud, wild, and impossible to control. At first, performing live felt magical, but soon the cheers became screams, and the screams became walls of noise that drowned everything. Ringo explained that by 1965 they were not playing concerts anymore. They were simply standing on stage while chaos exploded around us. He said the fans weren't listening to the music. They were only screaming because they saw the Beatles. Ringo joked that many times he couldn't even hear his own drums. He would watch John's back just to guess where the song was going. It wasn't performing, it was guessing. The fame felt bigger than the songs. Ringo revealed that the band tried everything: better speakers, new equipment, even switching their positions on stage, but nothing helped. The crowds just grew louder and more uncontrollable. He said what nobody wanted to admit at the time. We were losing the music, and that scared us. This fear slowly grew inside the band. They loved their fans, but they were terrified that the music was disappearing. And for a band that lived for sound, that was the worst feeling in the world. Little did they know things would only get worse, much worse, in the years ahead. Ringo Starr said that performing at Shea Stadium in 1965 was both amazing and terrifying. It was the biggest concert any band had ever attempted. Over 55,000 fans. But for Ringo, it was the moment he realized something was seriously wrong. He said the screaming was so loud that the band was completely cut off from the music. He couldn't hear John, he couldn't hear Paul, he couldn't hear George. In Ringo's words, "I may as well have been playing in the kitchen." He watched the crowd jumping, crying, running, fainting. It felt unreal, like they were performing inside a hurricane. He hit his drums harder and harder just to keep the rhythm, but it didn't matter. Nobody could hear anything. After the show, Ringo noticed something strange. Instead of celebrating their biggest concert ever, the band was quiet. John looked tired. Paul was pacing. George looked angry. Ringo felt empty. That night, they realized they were losing control. The shows were no longer about music. They were about survival. Ringo later said Shea Stadium was the beginning of the end. It was the moment they saw the future clearly. If the biggest concert in history felt like a mistake, how much worse could the next ones get? And unfortunately for them, the next ones did get worse. Ringo has spoken honestly about how dangerous their concerts became. What fans didn't see was the fear the band felt backstage. He said every city brought new threats. People pushing barriers, running to the stage, police losing control, and sometimes violent groups trying to break into the venues. At one concert, Ringo said they were rushed out through a kitchen because authorities believed someone might attack them. At another, a firecracker blew up near the stage, and John thought it was a gunshot. Ringo recalled, "For the first time, we weren't sure we would make it off the stage safely." He also explained that the band was exhausted from traveling. They barely slept. They lived in hotels, rode in armored cars, and ran from crowds that looked more like riots than fans. Ringo said the joy was disappearing. The pressure grew heavier each day. Managers, promoters, and police warned them of increasing security risks. Their concerts were no longer fun. They were becoming dangerous missions. Ringo admitted that he felt guilty because the fans weren't trying to harm them. They were simply out of control with excitement. But the danger was real. And the band was tired of being afraid. They just didn't know how to say it yet. But one event was about to push them over the edge, an event that nearly destroyed the band before their studio years even began. Ringo said one of the darkest moments came in 1966 when John Lennon made his "more popular than Jesus" comment. The world took it the wrong way, and suddenly the Beatles were at the center of a global storm. Ringo remembered the fear clearly. They traveled through America while protesters burned their records, destroyed posters, and threatened violence. Some radio stations banned their songs. Others encouraged people to teach the band a lesson. Ringo said the band felt trapped inside something they couldn't control. They were musicy, but suddenly they were targets. He recalled, "We didn't feel safe, and when you don't feel safe, music doesn't matter." At the concerts that year, the atmosphere changed. The crowds looked angrier, the security doubled, police held shields. Ringo felt a new kind of tension, the kind that squeezes your chest. He played the drums with shaking hands, hoping the show would end quickly. Paul tried to stay positive. John looked worried. George openly said he hated the tour. Ringo later admitted this was the moment when the band secretly began discussing stopping live performances. They didn't say it publicly, but they all felt it. The joy was disappearing. The danger was increasing. The controversies were growing. And something else was happening too, something that made touring feel pointless. Their music was evolving faster than the stage could handle. Ringo explained that one of the biggest reasons they stopped performing live was simple. Their new music was impossible to play on stage. By 1966, the Beatles were experimenting with new sounds, strange instruments, layered harmonies, and studio tricks that didn't exist on stage. Albums like Revolver and Rubber Soul were full of ideas that needed the studio to exist. Ringo said, "We were growing as musicians, but the stage stayed the same." Songs like Tomorrow Never Knows, Eleanor Rigby, and Love You Too used orchestras, backwards tapes, sitars, loops, and effects that no concert system could reproduce in the 60s. The band felt stuck. Their creativity was expanding, but the stage was shrinking. Ringo remembered rehearsing songs for the 1966 tour and realizing they sounded flat and empty without the studio magic. The audiences wouldn't hear the real music. They would hear a weak version of it. He said the band felt embarrassed performing songs that sounded incomplete. They wanted to push boundaries, but touring forced them backward. Ringo said it simply. Touring was killing the music. The choice became clear. Either stop experimenting and keep touring, or stop touring and make the greatest music they'd ever imagined. They chose the second option. But first, they had to survive the final tour. Ringo said the 1966 tour felt like running through a burning building. Everyone was tired. Everyone was frustrated. Everyone wanted it to end. They traveled from Germany to Japan, from the Philippines to America. Each stop brought new problems. Ringo said the flight schedules were insane. The food was terrible. The security was tight. The screaming crowds never stopped. In Japan, they performed while guards stood around the stage with swords. In Manila, they were chased by mobs after refusing a politician's invitation, something they didn't even understand at the time. Ringo said, It wasn't a tour, it was survival." The happiest moment of the entire tour was the last show at San Francisco's Candlestick Park. Not because the show was good, but because it was finally over. Backstage, John said, "That's it then. I'm not doing this anymore." George said, "Good. I've had enough." Paul looked relieved. Ringo felt free. They took a final picture on stage, knowing deep inside that this was truly the end. People around them thought they were joking, but the band knew. After that night, they never toured again. What came next changed music forever. Ringo said the moment touring ended, a new world opened. For the first time, they could breathe, they could experiment, they could take risks. The studio became their playground. They were no longer limited by amps, microphones, or screaming fans. They could use orchestras, sitars, tape loops, echoes, and whatever weird sounds came to mind. Ringo said, "Stopping touring didn't end the Beatles. It saved us." The band returned to the studio with fresh energy. He remembered how happy they felt making Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was the first time they created music with no pressure to perform it live. Ringo said recording became fun again. Paul brought endless ideas. John explored new sounds. George grew spiritually and musically, and Ringo himself experimented with drums, percussion, and rhythms he never tried before. The result? The Beatles created some of the most iconic music in history. Ringo believed that if they had continued touring, they might have broken up years earlier. The stress would have destroyed them. Instead, they reinvented themselves and the music industry. Their decision to stop touring didn't just change their lives, it changed the future of rock music forever. But the world still asked, "Why won't you perform again?" And finally, Ringo spoke the truth. Years later, fans continued asking why the Beatles stopped performing live. Some believed it was the screaming crowds. Others blamed the controversies. Some thought the band simply got tired. But Ringo said the real answer was much deeper. He said, "We stopped because we couldn't be the Beatles anymore on stage." He explained that the stage version of the band was outdated. It didn't match who they were becoming as musicians. They were evolving every day, but the live shows stayed frozen in time. Ringo said they didn't want to pretend. They didn't want to give fans something fake. They didn't want to stand on stage and mime the songs they created with passion in the studio. He also said the emotional toll was huge. They felt trapped, unable to go outside, breathe freely, or live normal lives. Ringo admitted that fame was beautiful, but also painful. Stopping touring was the first time they took control back. It was the first time they said, "We choose the music over the madness." Ringo said that decision made him proud. He believed it allowed the band to finish their journey with dignity, before the pressure destroyed them completely. And even though they never toured again, the music they created afterward proved they made the right choice. Ringo said that once the Beatles stopped touring, everything changed for the better. For the first time in years, they had peace. They worked on albums at their own pace. They slept. They rested. They lived like human beings again. He said each member grew creatively. John explored deeper lyrical themes. Paul pushed musical boundaries. George developed spiritually and musically, bringing new sounds like Indian instruments into the band. Ringo found joy in experimenting with unique drumming styles. He felt respected, valued, and free to try new things. He said, "Stopping live shows gave us time to grow as artists. Most importantly, the band rediscovered their friendship. Without the stress of constant traveling, they laughed more, talked more, and enjoyed making music again." Ringo believed that the albums created during this period, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, The White Album, Abbey Road, were only possible because they stopped touring. He said the world might have lost the Beatles concerts, but it gained some of the greatest albums in history. And then, Ringo shared the emotional reason behind it all. Ringo Starr said something deeply emotional years later that summed up everything. "We stopped performing live because we loved the music too much to let it die." He said the band wanted to protect their creativity, their health, and their friendship. They didn't want to become exhausted versions of themselves. They didn't want to disappoint fans by giving performances they couldn't hear, couldn't enjoy, and couldn't control. Ringo believed that stopping touring wasn't the end of the Beatles. It was the beginning of a new chapter that produced music that touched millions for generations. He said they made the right choice, even if the world didn't understand at the time, and in his heart, he knew that their legacy lived not on the stage, but in the songs born in the studio. Ringo ended his explanation with a powerful truth. "We didn't quit the stage, we saved the music." And that is why the Beatles, despite being the biggest live act on Earth, walked away from the spotlight to create history in silence.